The old CRT television flickered in the corner of my cramped apartment, its screen a mess of static and distorted colors. I'd bought it at a thrift store for $10, figuring it'd be a quirky addition to my place. It was one of those bulky relics from the 80s, complete with rabbit ear antennas and a dial that clicked satisfyingly when you turned it. I hadn't expected it to work, but when I plugged it in, it hummed to life, spitting out a low buzz that filled the room like a swarm of distant bees. I should have known something was off then, but I was too busy marveling at my retrofine to care. That first night, I left it on while I cooked dinner. The static was oddly soothing, like white noise for a city dweller used to sirens and shouting neighbors. But around midnight, as I sat on my sagging couch with a beer, the static shifted. It wasn't just noise anymore. It started to whisper. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the kind of thing your brain conjures when you're half asleep and the world feels thin. But the whispers grew clearer, forming words I couldn't quite catch, like a conversation just out of reach. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The static seemed to pulse, almost like it was breathing. I turned the dial, hoping to find a channel, but every station was the same. A gray storm of noise with those eerie whispers weaving through it. Then, for a split second, the screen cleared. A face appeared pale, eyeless, its mouth stretched into a silent scream. I jolted back, spilling my beer. The image was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by static. My heart hammered, but I told myself it was a glitch, some old broadcast signal bleeding through. Old TVs did weird shit, right? The next night, I didn't turn it on. I couldn't shake the image of that face, and the whispers had burrowed into my dreams, leaving me waking in cold sweats. But around 2 a.m., the TV clicked on by itself. The static roared, louder than before, and the whispers were unmistakable now. They said my name. Elliot, they hissed, over and over, like a chant. I yanked the plug from the wall, but the screen stayed lit, the static writhing like a living thing. I grabbed a screwdriver and tore the back panel off, half expecting to find some prankster's device inside. But there was nothing, just dusty tubes and wires and a faint smell of burnt plastic. I should have thrown it out then, but I didn't. Curiosity is a cruel bastard. Instead, I started researching. Online forums for vintage electronics mentioned haunted TVs as a joke, but a few posts felt too specific. One user, StaticSeer92, described a similar experience. A CRT that whispered names and showed faces. They'd traced its origins to a defunct TV station in rural Ohio, shut down in 1987 after a fire killed the entire night crew. The post ended abruptly, with the user saying they were going to confront it. They hadn't posted since. I dug deeper, finding a grainy article about the fire. The station, WZKT, had been a low-budget operation, airing reruns and local ads. The fire was ruled arson, but no suspects were ever found. Rumors swirled about the station manager, a guy named Harold Vance, who'd been obsessed with experimental broadcasts. Something about subliminal frequencies to reach the audience's subconscious. The article mentioned a single survivor, a janitor who'd fled the building but refused to speak about what he'd seen. The TVs used for their broadcasts were auctioned off after the station closed. My stomach twisted as I read the lot number. It matched the faded sticker on the bottom of my set. That night, the TV turned on again. This time, the whispers didn't just say my name, they told me to watch. The static parted like a curtain, revealing a room that looked like my apartment, but wrong. The walls were cracked, the furniture decayed, and a figure stood in the corner, its back to me. It was tall, too tall, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Slowly it turned, revealing that same eyeless face from before. But now, it smiled a wide, toothy grin that stretched beyond its jaw. The screen flickered, and suddenly, I was looking at myself, sitting on my couch, staring at the TV. The figure was behind me, its head tilted, watching. I spun around, but my apartment was empty. My pulse thundered in my ears. The TV went black, and for a moment, I thought it was over. Then the whispers started again, not from the TV, but from behind me. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stood in the center of the room, spinning wildly, but there was nothing. The whispers laughed, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. I decided to end it. I dragged the TV to the dumpster behind my building, smashing it with a crowbar until the screen shattered and the wires spilled out like guts. But when I got back to my apartment, the TV was there, sitting in its usual spot, the screen glowing with static. The whispers were louder now, angrier, demanding I watch. I unplugged every appliance, cut the power at the breaker, but the TV stayed on. And then I saw a reflection in the screen. Not my face, but hers. My sister Claire, who died in a car accident 10 years ago. Her eyes were gone, her mouth twisted into that same horrific smile. "Elliot," she whispered, "you left me." That was the first plot twist. I hadn't just bought a haunted TV. It was personal. Claire and I had been close, but I'd been driving that night. I'd survived. She hadn't. The guilt had eaten me alive for years, but I'd buried it. Now, it was staring back at me through the static, accusing me. The TV wasn't just showing me horrors. It was pulling them from my mind, my memories, my shame. Desperate, I tracked down the janitor from the WZKT fire, now an old man living in a trailer park. His name was Roy, and he looked like he hadn't slept in decades. When I mentioned the TV, he went pale. "You saw the faces, didn't you?" he whispered. He told me about Harold Vance's experiments, how he'd been trying to broadcast the other side. The station's final broadcast, the night of the fire, wasn't a normal signal. It was a frequency that opened something a door to somewhere else. The fire wasn't arson. It was a desperate attempt to stop what Vance had unleashed. Roy had seen the faces too, in the monitors that night, and he'd run while his coworkers burned. Roy gave me an address, a warehouse where Vance's old equipment was supposedly stored. If I wanted to stop the TV, I had to destroy the source, he said. I drove there that night, armed with a flashlight and a sledgehammer. The warehouse was abandoned, its windows boarded up, but inside, I found rows of old CRTs, all glowing faintly despite being unplugged. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something fouler, like rotting meat. In the center of the room was a machine, a tangle of wires and dials, labeled frequency modulator. It hummed, just like my TV. I raised the sledgehammer, but before I could swing, the screens around me flickered to life. Faces filled every one Claire, my parents, friends I'd lost touch with, all eyeless, all smiling. The whispers became a scream, and the air grew heavy, pressing against my chest. Then, the second twist, the faces weren't just my memories. They were real. Roy had lied. He wasn't a survivor. He was part of it. He'd been feeding the signal, keeping it alive, and I'd walked right into his trap. The warehouse wasn't a solution. It was a shrine. The faces spoke in unison, their voices a deafening chorus. "Join us, Elliot." The machine's hum intensified, and I felt my thoughts unraveling, my memories bleeding into the static. I swung the sledgehammer, smashing the modulator. Sparks flew, and the screens went dark, one by one. The whispers stopped, replaced by silence so heavy it felt like drowning. I stumbled out of the warehouse, gasping, and drove home. The TV was gone. My apartment was quiet. But every night since, I hear the static in my head, faint but growing louder. Sometimes, in the dark, I see Claire's face, smiling that awful smile. And the worst part? I'm starting to smile back.